Welcome. Today's presentation is LII under the hood. It's under the hood of a particular project of ours, which is our new version of the Code of Federal Regulations. I am going to talk for a moment about LII and quickly turn over to the people who have built the CFR project to show you how it works. What is the LII? We are a small, this group and the left half of Austin Greathouse back there is the LII, at least for the moment. We are a publishing, engineering, and research group focused on providing open access to the law, not just providing free access though, facilitating intellectual access as well. We are a resource to others. We've been doing what we do for a long time. LII was founded in 1992, so we're able to provide some assistance to other open access to law projects. And we are a website serving pages out to, I think at last count, 1.5 million unique visitors a month from 210 countries. So what have we been up to? Mostly good. We hope. We publish popular resources like the Constitution, Supreme Court opinions, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, and most importantly, vis-a-vis the CFR project, the U.S. Code. Everything we publish, we also maintain. The federal rules change every year, most of them. The Office of the Law Revision Council sends us updates of titles to the U.S. Code that have to be updated on our site. We also update and maintain all of our original topical material. In addition to which, we try to take best advantage of all of the new material that is becoming available. In the past few years, new repositories of case law have been made available for open access. The government is beginning to publish primary sources in XML, and we are actively exploring the contours of these resources to see how they can be used, and quite frankly, what it will take in order to get them to the point where we are able to use them, and we'll hear more about that from the engineers who have been building our resources. We also help collaborators. Our experience gives us some insight into back-end engineering and the front-end features that we think are useful for people who need access to case law and legislation and regulations. So we've been collaborating with many entities, including several places in the U.S. government, like the IRS, and for this project, the Government Printing Office, to assist in some of their production of publications and to help out more generally on some bulk data issues. So why are we getting involved with the CFR? Well, we like projects that facilitate intellectual access to legal materials. CFR contains the material of most practical use to the average person with a business problem. We often talk about the proverbial dry cleaner who needs to get rid of some chemicals. And CFR is, for many of these kinds of problems, the place where people need to look. The government's eCFR is very difficult to use. We have found, as others have found. We now have the raw data that we need to generate our own version of the CFR, although it doesn't come ready out of the box for us to flip a few switches and turn it into something beautiful. It needs some work. The CFR is the natural companion to the U.S. Code, which is an extremely popular resource on our site. And we think that it can potentially self-fund, although that is often a pipe dream. So what you'll see today, first, a brief demo of the features that we've developed so far, overlapping perspectives on the project, how it works from the people who have built it. technologist leader, Tom Bruce, with his engineer's hat on connecting a Drupal content management system front end to the XML database backend. Our programmer, Brian Hughes, on version control, and our newest victim, web developer, UI guy, Wayne Weigel, on taming the Federal Register. And finally, our XML guru, Dave Shetland, U.S. code veteran, on how we develop the features we need. Finally, we want you to ask questions, and we will leave time for them at the end. So, take a look. Oops.
Back.
Yep.
Oh.
Great. And let's see here. Nope. All right. Apologies for the technical issue here. There we go. All right. So here is 21 CFR. 1.101. What you see here is that's actually live on our development server. It's basically a copy of that section of the CFR. A couple of interesting things that have been done so far. You see search box. That can be useful. We have this resources tab which prints out a list of crowdsourced links to guidance documents that anyone is able to submit and connect to the part level of CFR. And then, of course, most importantly, the text of the CFR formatted correctly to reflect the nested paragraph structure. And links to relevant sections of the US code on our website. We have a lot of work ahead of us on this project, and I will now turn it over to the people who have been building it to tell you more about it. So Dan.
Monkey effect. Thank you. I'm Dan Nagy. I'm the sysadmin, systems engineer, and tool pusher, whatever you want to call me. So I'm building the scaffolding, or responsible for the scaffolding that we run not only CFR on, but will be running and are running a lot of our current infrastructure on. We're running it, we're transitioning everything to the Amazon computing cloud, the EC2 cloud. So when we say server, it could actually be a brick and mortar server. It's more likely that it's going to be the instances that exist out in the Amazon cloud at this point. The solution that we have and had for a while now is built on LAMP stack. I call it the LAMP Plus stack because not only do we have the normal LAMP stack, but we're also leveraging a backend XML database called Exist. Plus we also have something called Sphinx, also sitting on the back end. We're running within an optimized environment. What I mean by that is that we currently have at our disposal the ability to generate instances that are optimized for serving web pages and instances that are optimized for other things. In our case, heavy on the back end database. We have, at this point in time, we have something that I'm also calling the mixed mode production environment. What that means to me is that some of us are very collection-oriented organizations. So when we talk about CFR, that's a collection. We talk about US code, that's a separate collection. Again, different collection. So because of that, we're moving on a collection-by-collection basis stuff into the cloud as we move through our corpus of stuff that we maintain. Currently, we've moved our topic stuff out. It's running in the cloud on its own little EC2 instance, and we're running and we will be running CFR. The rest of our collections are still what I consider to be the flat kind of HTML files, just Apache serving up stuff with a MySQL backend. They're not sitting in a CMS, in this case Drupal. So we're currently juggling the CMS side of stuff versus the kind of the old architecture stuff. The backend. So in CFR world, the back end, the stuff that is the driving force. And the graphic, I warn you, is slightly confusing. Pay no attention to it. There was a clown there. Somebody made it go away. The back end for the CFR project exists as an XML database. We are kind of agnostic about which XML database to use. We knew we wanted to use an XML database. There are a couple out there. Exist is proven, for at least for us, to be a relatively decent one to use. The Exist database is not, it's preloaded, and then as Tom will tell, we do lazy instantiation to get it back out to the cloud. So if we have any problems, they're likely not going to be real-time problems. They'll come in ingestion time when the data actually comes into the CFR and goes into the Exist database. We have had one scaling issue with it, which is a versioning issue. Once we upgraded to the newest version, it all went away. The other back-end part of the stuff, the big back-end chunk that we have is MySQL, relational database, depending on what religious persuasion you are. And then we also have something that runs kind of on top of or alongside of MySQL called Sphinx. And Sphinx actually stands for, look it up, SQL Phrase Indexer. And it's basically a search engine. So we replace, and it talks MySQL natively. It handles InnoDB tables natively. So we have transitioned our full-site search and the way we search our collections to a Sphinx backend infrastructure. And then, as I said before, we have everything optimized so that we can have a separate web front-end server and then optimized for just serving web pages, clustered if need be, and then a back-end MySQL server if we need, as we need to, and then have that optimized for doing just MySQL or, in this case, Exist or whatever else we're using any of the back-end stuff that's going on. Exist, by the way, and this is just me thinking, maybe we may have it may be good to have some more inodes associated with Exist because it does kind of save stuff as files. So that's something that we would optimize on our Exist instance. And the last thing we'll talk about is the managing anarchy stuff. It's once we start transitioning to the CMS, we start making decisions about, we have to make decisions and refine the process about how we do the update process. A lot of our stuff is factory generated. So we have a very large server at this point, and it is a brick and mortar server still, that takes in information from disparate sources, processes them all, and automatically puts it onto our website. In many cases, there are firewalls there so that human eyes look at it before it goes out. But not only do we have that, but now as we transition to the CMS, we will start having user input into some of our infrastructure. So we have to figure out what part of the update process goes where, how do you manage that. Then code versus content. Before it's very cut and dry, but once we move over to the CMS, we're developing modules, and then conversely, so how do you move over the code associated that you've changed on your CMS as opposed to the content you've changed on your CMS? And that's an ongoing challenge for us. And then the final part of it is where do you put it, live versus test? In other words, as you get something built, how do you take that and then reinstantiate it from the develop and the engineering and the release engineering part of the process over to live? And that's something that we're constantly working on as well. We've got a couple of solutions out there, and they seem to be working pretty well. Brian is going to talk about SVN. So that's basically what we're doing as far as looking at the infrastructure through the lens of the CFR. And I guess at this point I will stop talking and hand it over to Tom.
They let me play with code every once in a while, even though it usually breaks quite badly. So Dan showed you the block diagram of the back end. Again, it's an Exist XML server whose contents are being served out through the Drupal content management platform. We had a couple of reasons for doing that I'll talk about in some detail later, but the principal one is that the CMS makes it easy for us to add features of various kinds. I mean, some are actually helpful with the information itself. Some are frankly things like Google advertising that help support us. But the whole point was to get better control of our screen real estate and to be able to do things quite easily and flexibly. And Drupal has done that for us. So from it, we get easy UI elements, we get tabs, we get breadcrumbs, we get other kinds of navigational stuff. And it provides URL dispatching that turns sort of head-compatible URLs that look like a CFR citation into some action that will actually produce the text of the CFR that you see on the screen, along with some debugging support. We were initially worried about the performance of the XML database, and that has turned out not to be an issue on the delivery side, although, as Dan mentioned, it is a bit of an issue on the ingestion side, or was in older versions, and we're still looking at it quite closely because we're not completely sure how it's going to hold up in production. This will be a popular resource. So because of that, we've arranged the system so that Drupal uses something called lazy instantiation, which basically says if Drupal is asked for some chunk of the CFR and it does not have it, it reaches back to the XML database, sucks it from there, and then does not do that again until it is told explicitly to refresh itself. So it's sort of building itself as it goes, pulling these resources out as it needs to update itself. And it sounds as though you might do that over a long period of time with people requesting stuff from the database, and things that weren't requested very often wouldn't happen very often. But the reality is you sort of have to do it all at once, because if you don't, the full text search engine will be missing stuff that isn't getting Drupal, so you kind of do it all in one big slam. Another primary reason to keep those two things separated from one another, the Drupal presentation and the exist database, is that actually our development timelines are quite different for when we do features versus when we do XML data enrichment. It turns out that working with federal data, or indeed any non-native data that you're trying to cram into XML, is kind of a pain in the ass. It's a long, painstaking process, verging on sort of natural language processing at times. And it's a very long development timeline, as opposed to just banging out a couple of features in Drupal that are going to put some RSS feed there or whatever. And so the idea was to try to not have one of those processes dependent on the other. The idea was to sort of decouple them so that data enrichment could take the time it needed. In the meantime, features could be happening all over the place. The actual conversation between Drupal and exist takes place using xQuery via XML RPC. And the HTML that's created from the XML database, you could do it a number of ways. xQuery has templating features that actually allow it to be rendered as HTML. You also have the ability to put XSLT filters in front of your XML on the way out, when the data request goes back to exist. At the moment, we're doing most of the templating in xQuery, which is basically a query language that says, give me some XML and make it look like this. We will probably move over to XSLT as the stuff solidifies in production, just because I think the performance is a little better, because it's a little better version control over what we're doing with the filter. A final thing, one of our aspirations for this is a lot of crowdsourcing, I think the CFR is probably the broadest contact surface between the general public and the federal legal system. And there's a lot of expertise out there about the CFR that might not be coming from lawyers. We'd like to capture that. You saw 2 tabs in the demo. There will ultimately be 8, 9, 10, with various sorts of things that are related to the section you're looking at. And the question was, as it always has been with this kind of stuff, how do you manage metadata through the process of a core data refresh? In other words, when the US code is updated, what happens to all that lovely metadata that your crowdsourcers and people have been tagging on it? And when that update happens and stuff starts moving around and so forth and so on. Drupal actually makes that quite easy for us to manage because of the taxonomy system that is actually built into it. So at ingestion time, we automatically build a taxonomy within Drupal that is nothing more nor less than a model of the structure of CFR itself, as you can see in the illustration there. That taxonomy becomes the means by which everything else is classified. So that at the point where we change the underlying text, all we have to do is move the taxonomy entries around appropriately, and all those links that some hapless employee of the DOT has put there to go with the appropriate sections move right along with it through the update process. So that's been another major reason to do it. It gives us a framework for crowdsourcing. Brian's going to talk about a little different kind of persistence, having to do with making the code come back when it needs to. I'll get out of his way.
Hi.
This is a fun game.
It's a fun which?
Fair game.
Hi, I'm Brian Hughes. One of my titles is version control prints or something. For those who don't know, version control, well, we use Subversion, also referred to as SVN, and it's version control software, which means you take a project, which means a directory tree in the files therein, or more than one, and you use your version control software to stick it in a repository, which is essentially something magical, usually on a remote machine, and it tracks changes thereon too. It doesn't do that actually automatically. That's something a developer or user has to do, send these changes up, and then they can also pull them down. So, okay. So if I hit the space bar, oh, okay. No. Okay. So here's some reasons why people use version control. I mean, first, it allows for collaborating work where there's a repository, a couple of installations pointing at it, a couple of developers, and changes can be propagated with the command and update sequence. You add someone to the team, you can point them at the repository, they can grab a working copy of the project to work on. That's nice. It serves as backups. And because you're hopefully committing things with messages that are helpful, you log messages saying this is what I fixed and why, you can actually track what's going on. Okay. More specifically with Drupal. Drupal uses a database, and we've decided, Dan and I have fought over this, and we decided not to try to dump and version the database. So that means we're not putting the database in Subversion in the repository. Also, we're not putting the core, which means when you do a raw installation of Drupal, is what you get. We're not putting that under version control. Without those, that means that you don't get let's check out a copy of a working copy of your Drupal installation, because you're missing a database user. On a more cheerful note, one thing I do like about it is, because this is a third-party software, not something we built, but we know, like Dave and I know what we put there, it's a real tangle of files, and as you add modules, it just gets worse and worse. And version control, recurses through all this madness, and you can use commands to kind of see what's happening. That's very nice, because sometimes you just wouldn't find things if you had no clue, don't have a clue. And basically, if you just focus on the most typical case of working on a module, you get real version control. You can get the support for collaboration and backup and so on, ignoring the larger Drupal picture that's problematic. And a couple of whines from me. I find that it's partially because it is someone else's software that I suddenly have sitting on a computer. It's hard to, it always installs, you always end up installing it with all these tarballs as in compressed archive files, which you really don't want in the repository because they're completely irrelevant and take up a lot of space. And also, some modules will produce a lot of log files, which can be, again, it's not obvious where they are. And you really don't want that kind of stuff because it's jittery, volatile information, files change and they're irrelevant. And it turns out to be a little tricky sometimes once you put something in a repository to get it out without collaborating. It's a bit of a song and dance sometimes. Okay, and Drupal also saves all kinds of state information, session information. Under most circumstances, that's in the database. So if you're not messing with the database, you don't care. But so it's less of a subversion issue. When you're cloning, you're always sorry. I'm always sorry because I failed to truncate the right tables, and I brought all this session information, which has nothing to do with my current installation. Version control and us. Well, one really big issue I think is that stuff breaks. Like this is, or let me say, this is, we're using scripting languages. Drupal was written in PHP, so it's you can go ahead and change the production version. It's not like a compiled C program. So something breaks with the Supreme Court. Are we going to go and is Dave or am I going to go through some protocol with some version of fixing it in development and merging it and calling out an update? Or are we just going to run over to the production machine and fix 3 lines of code? So you have to tolerate. That's going to happen, and you really can't do much about it. The problem is that is kind of philosophically and pragmatically bad from the point of view of version control. And in fact, it can have some very bad implications because it's a bad thing, but it happens. Where do we stand? I mean, people say, Brian, I know we're supposed to be using Subversion. Can you set up this stuff I'm working in the repository? So they're following the rules. That's great. That's not sustainable, and we're kind of trying to make this transition because at some point people are going to say, yeah, I'm doing all this stuff. I'm going through all this rigmarole. Because remember, it's not automatic. You have to take steps to commit yourself and so on. And what am I getting for it? And I got to say, I use it for personal stuff. I like it a lot, but I'm not sure. We haven't yet figured out what it is beyond a religion or a good thing with a capital G and a capital T. And that's my slightly sad ending. It's a crusade. I'm not sure if we're winning or not.
Can I say in your defense? In your defense, it saved money about 3 times in the past year. So that's in your defense. Excellent. So there we go.
Yeah, you hear that, Tim?
And also just a superficial description of all. We'll welcome questions afterwards. Wayne.
My turn. Okay. Like Sarah mentioned, I'm the newest victim. I'm the FNG. I am currently mucking through what is the Federal Register. In order to understand the Federal Register, you have to sort of understand a little bit about the CFR to begin with. It's broken into titles, and there's a set of titles that are released quarterly. So annually, you have a completely new version of the entire CFR. The Federal Register contains all of the change orders, all of the change requests that are going to be applied to the Code of Federal Regulations. It's issued daily. It's, well, I shouldn't say daily, but work daily.
Business days.
There you go. Business daily. Couldn't think of a good word for that. And like I said, it contains a list of everything that is happening involving the CFR. Right now, we do have an XML version of it. With that XML version also comes another file, a mods file, which is the metadata, which is more or less what we really want to get out of it, but it doesn't contain the full corpus of the Federal Register. So we have to do a little bit of work with it. That's the XML. A little bit more on that in just a second. If you look at the Federal Register on GPO's site, you'll see it's very human readable. It's organized into departments with final rules, proposed rules, and notices. Final rules. This is what we're changing. Proposed rules. We are thinking about changing this in some manner. Notices we are thinking about changing these rules. And you may or may not be able to comment on them at this point in time. Furthermore, each of these things, obviously for us, we want to know when is this happening. So all these things have dates associated with them. This will provide us with a point-in-time system that we can leverage and that we can further, added value to the CFR on our site. So there's effective, which is more or less final rules, when is it going to happen, and then filed and published, proposed rules. You get the idea. Now, like I said just a second ago, all this is now in XML. We're pulling it directly from GPO. However, GPO's XML is just this side of well-formed and usable. If you are a human reading it, it's great. You can more or less understand it. You go through it, figure it out. Machine readable, not in the least. It's some attributes, or some elements have attributes. Other elements take those and make them into nested tags. The tags change depending on where you're looking, because it's also sort of makes, what's not, I can't think of the word, but it's...
Dog's breakfast?
Well, that, but it's also dependent on, that's very, very appropriate. Because they're maintaining sort of the departmental formatting from before, you get a lot of, the tags themselves may make sense, but whatever's in those tags could range. You think of any variation you can of it, how we might put a date in, you're going to have it in there at some point. So, what we're doing, or what I'm doing more specifically, is pulling down both the mods file, this large XML version of Federal Register, cleaning it up somewhat, putting it into a single file that we're going to be using in the near future. All these XML files that we're talking about are getting shoved into Exist, as Dan mentioned earlier. Now, if you think of Exist, think of an old wooden card catalog sitting in your public library when you were in elementary school. Drawers are collections. Each drawer has cards in them, which can be files or further collections, which then themselves have more files, more collections. We can query this entire database all in one fell swoop, say give me everything across all titles of all years that deal with law, whatever we want to put into our X query, like Tom mentioned. Or you can go all the way down to a very specific file, even a very specific portion of a specific file. So that's all great for web interface when you have this pipeline, this way of connecting to it. But in order to use the database more in a GUI manner, Exist comes with a web dApp for easy browsing, just looks like a regular file browser. You can connect to it through Finder, any other version. We also have a RESTful interface, which is connecting to the database with HTTP messages. You can get documents using get or post. You can put and delete methods, entire collections. Right now, I have written a connection library within Ruby to perform all the most common actions. You can submit queries or even save queries along with all of these files. So, all that said, the Federal Register, like I mentioned a little bit ago, the Federal Register is all this stuff. And what we intend to do with it is present it alongside of the Code of Federal Regulations on the website. So as you're viewing, you'll see all the changes that are pending on whatever title propagating up through. So if you're in, like Sarah showed you, section 101. So if you're all the way down to section 101, you'll see not only the changes to that, but the changes for all the titles, for the entire title above it. So, and with that, turn it over to Dave, who is actually doing the CFR.
Dave Shetland, a guy around LII's gotten his name associated with XML over the last few years. So I'm going to stand up and talk about a bit of XML whence and whither, with the present and whither basically being the subject of the CFR project. As you've gathered already, that has a lot to do with XML in the middle, which is really where it is. That XML in the middle concept is something that started basically a decade ago when we had the idea of beginning to move our data, our overall data process into a XML-centric one, so that we could have that sort of thing in the middle to make use of, and that was done and has worked very well. It's been our programming centerpiece for all of the data that we bulk process. We handled the U.S. code and then have continued to refine that. After that, we moved all the Supreme Court data that's being processed. Yesterday morning, 4 titles of the U.S. code came in. They basically just processed all the way through to the website. That's web pages and PDF files. The thing in the middle was XML that gave us the hub to easily control all of that. And so, the U.S. code is our reference book. We're talking now about CFR, but our big experience base is the U.S. code. We tend to go back to that for our schema base and all of our experience. The word discovery, when I use it, tends to relate both to the abstract idea in schema, data modeling, as well as discovering, in a sense of a piece of regex, looking at scanning data and discovering something from the bottom up. And in dealing with U.S. code, there are several major categories of structural data that we just discovered was what we needed to look for. That was the table of contents level, chapters and chapter headings, that sort of thing. We tended to categorize those as super sections. At the boundary between that and sections, we discovered section numbers. It has an amazing amount of activity and actually embeds some structure there. Paragraphs nest inside sections. Excuse me, and inside paragraphs, you have these things called citations. Internal cites called cross-references internal to the corpus. That's one kind of thing, and as well as citations to external documents. In developing the D2D, the schema for these various XML elements, we've tended to preserve we've tried to preserve the source data, even if it didn't necessarily, the use of it wasn't necessarily obvious. The point is to, over time, be able to refine our efforts at semantically bootstrapping the stuff into something useful, more and more, increasingly useful. So we tend to, this idea of preserving, having a standardized format, but nonetheless preserving what was there in the original is what we're after. So for the CFR, we're driving at XML with that decade of experience, and it's working really well. The exist database is a very recent, a very welcome addition to the XML tool set that just makes the whole thing, makes all of our experience just very, it's very gratifying that we've got that experience. And it's really working very well for us as we work through the details of dealing with our specific data. The CFR source, we actually did originally took the typesetting data from the GPO that is the same sort of typesetting code that we were used to with the U.S. code. That worked amazingly well at first, but actually then the details began to get to us, and we realized that it was really a title by title slugging in. Different slight differences would present totally different issues. So titles would work, and the next one just wouldn't. GPO came along with their XML version of the SGML, their edit author SGML, and that was a wonderful thing. I'm giving them a gold star for that, because if nothing else, it gives us, it is correct, correct XML. It parses. And although it shows the same sorts of issues, it is actually from the same edit process as the Federal Register data that Wayne was talking about earlier. At least it is consistent XML. And we can get a corpus. In fact, three years worth of total corpus, and that part of it is free. Now, of course, we have to deal with the fact that their XML does the same thing as ours does, in the sense that this is their first cut, so they are trying to preserve what was in the HTML, and so more power to them. And so that's what we're dealing with. The thing is, now that we're starting with that and doing our value adds, we're doing value adds against a totally different, a radically different scheme. I mean, radically different, and that's slightly more of a challenge than I thought it would be. But we're getting there. Even with the titles that we were handling in the typesetting code, we're not getting the table of contents level structure, and the HTML XML from GPO does in fact give that to us for free. So that's a wonderful thing. We still do have to add the nested paragraph structure and all the citation tagging. We're doing that. So this sort of puts it all on a table, which we can address mostly in the Q&A. As this outlines, we're basically assuming that this nested paragraph structure internal to this section is something we're going to be adding, as well as looking for citations. The schema situation, though, is as I mentioned, that for the U.S. code, that our 10 years of experience, the U.S. code and the other things we've done, we just use the schema that we've developed, and we know, and it's sort of ours. We have intellectual ownership of it and are comfortable with it. With the CFR, we're making this new commitment, which is that, as far as we know, we're going to try to make this work. That the schema we're starting with is this radically different one, with some LII tuning as necessary, obviously additions for the elements to start there, for the structures I mentioned. And so I think that's where we wind up.
So those are 5 views on parts of how it works, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. The updating feature that Wayne was talking about, we need to incorporate that parallel table of authorities to cross-reference the authorizing statutes from the U.S. code, going back and forth to CFR, and then more abstractly at the moment, some linked data project, which will enable us to incorporate additional data about specific things that are mentioned in the CFR, so that they can be identified in a visual way. I'm going to quickly turn it over to your questions. I'm sure that you have many. So questions, please.
Stunned silence.
I have one. It seems like when you get the data from GPO, all the data come from GPO, right? Is there any talk or discussion between LI and GPO in terms of the data set?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, we have one coming up next week, in fact. This was started actually initially as, there was a kind of funny political thing that went on with this. They first approached us about this almost 2 years ago, when they were beginning to get pressure from the Obama administration to do more stuff with public data transparency. And it turned out, inside GPO, you have a number of people who are worried about mission loss because the work that they do has eroded considerably over the years, and who are worried about cost recovery. And to either of those groups, the idea that some gang of lunatics at Cornell are going to be giving this stuff away is not necessarily the best news. So for internal purposes, they needed kind of a fig leaf. And the fig leaf that surfaced was the Federal Depository Library Program. They could justify giving us the data for free despite a certain amount of internal opposition because Cornell is part of FDLP and we are. So the way that this was concocted was actually as a three-way partnership between us, the Cornell Law School Library, and GPO. With the understanding that there was likely to be technical feedback involved because in fact they had never actually done any software that would parse their own typesetting data into XML format, and they wanted that code from us, among other things. So yes, there's a lot of talk back and forth, and a lot of things to talk about.
So you're getting, it's just the same question, but in a different way, I guess. You're getting the data that is not well formed and can be anything, and then you're transforming it into well formed XML, and that cycle is going to continue until when? That is. Why can't there be a standard?
What we used to up until very recently, I mean months ago, it's very recent epoch, at which point they get the gold star, I think, for being at least starting this process. They're delivering well-formed XML. It's the schema is one that is one that we have to deal with. It reflects preservation a lot of the structure that's kind of awkward, but it is well-formed XML.
This is the CFR, right?
In the XML, if your terminology was the XML terminology, in other words, does it parse? Can I walk up to exist and put it in there without any questions? And the answer is yes, we can. Now that's totally different than anything else we've had before. Before, we've always had to take some kind of data, raw, ASCII, or then the typesetting code turned out to have some things, some tags we could use as surrogate tags to at least bootstrap the thing a little bit. And then that's what we've dealt with all along up until now. And so that's where we plunked down the XML concept and developed our own DTD and started to move things into that from the totally unknown world.
I think that actually we've created a little bit of confusion here with Lane's grousing about the nature of the Federal Register. Because in fact there are two ways that XML can veer into the ditch, Mo.
One said was not well formed, and one said what was filtered from the SGML was in good shape.
It's well formed XML, but the point is that it's the end point of any amount of horsing around in the federal agencies, right? So they're getting all this legacy tagging and stuff in there that they've done a reasonably good job of organizing, but as to whether stuff is consistently expressed from one substructure to the other, as Wayne says, dates are done in different ways in different places. The same thing is called different stuff in different places.
And that's at different levels too. You don't always have the same information at the same level within each listing. So supplemental information is one that they love to throw around. You see a lot of that's just the tag. That's it. Supplemental information. It can have anything at once in there, and that could be at level 1, it could be at level 5, and it doesn't matter. There's no rhyme or reason to it. So it's well formed, but it's not machine readable, like I said.
I guess I would say that what GPO has done, and they were relatively explicit about this when we talked to them. They're slightly cagey, but only slightly cagey. I think they made a very definite decision at one point that keeping their internal representation of this stuff, using labels and structures that were recognizable to their customers and the agencies as being stuff that the agencies had done, rather than trying to turn it into something uniform that would have the agencies thinking that somehow the GPO was trying to impose something on them. I think they decided that was just politically more advisable. So you get these kind of dumb things that are them not sorting out what the rest of government is doing.
Yeah, in the Federal Register and the CFR stuff may have differences, but I'm more familiar now with the CFR, Dwayne more with the Federal Register streams of this stuff. But the one consolidating point I feel to state, I think was on the slide somewhere, is that these are, I said ours is it's an intermediate form, and theirs is an intermediate form. Neither one of them, they're not competing final forms. They're not competing best forms of legal data. That is a separate discussion that we are involved in, and a very interesting one. But the best neutral or generic legal data format is an entirely different subject. That will be a target for these intermediate forms whose goal is to preserve where they came from, but to be XML, if you understand what I mean. So we can get into the exist area and so forth, where it's easy to shuffle things and compare things and so forth, and then move into the sort of merged schema idea.
More questions?
I like Blake's guys up there, Tim.
Well, I mean, now we get certain type of stuff, like some of the regulation room stuff and the rulemaking. Maybe you'd be bringing us into that for more agency things, and maybe discuss that a little bit.
Oh, sure. We have a, I guess you'd call it sort of a sister project at Cornell, called the Cornell Rulemaking Initiative that grew out of some work that really started as part of an NSF grant that we had a few years ago to do management of public comment and public rulemaking processes. And has gone on to be an experiment largely run by my colleague Cynthia Farina, who's actually an administrative lawyer, in trying to figure out how one can use computers and computer interfaces to actually get better public comment in the notice of comment rulemaking process. Years ago, everybody started trying to figure out, well, how do you manage 600,000 comments that come in a Save the Polar Bears sort of rulemaking? What do you do with it? We've sort of sidestepped that issue of comment management and said, well, how do you get better comments? And that's what Siri is doing. And they're doing that through development of different interfaces that we think or hope will encourage deeper commentary on stuff. That's a project that we are at this point basically hosting and that I have some intellectual input into, but that's really the extent of our involvement. Now, ultimately, what we will do is start folding these two things together. First, at the sort of trivial level, in which all of the proposed rule stuff that is going into the public comment sites run by Siri is going to be linking back to this and so forth and so on. But we may also be able to do some rather more interesting things, because as we get a volume of public commentary and as we get a volume of crowdsourced material and commentary surrounding the CFR, we'll be able to do much more interesting sort of natural language processing things and full text search indexing, trying to pull all that stuff together. Because at the moment, it's just too damn hard for people who are commenting on a rule to find out, for example, if anything like that has ever been done before, or what the rules are out on the state level. We're also talking right now with partners in Italy and Spain about the possibility of cross-jurisdictional regulatory retrieval in multiple languages, so that if you were looking at the Italian reg that has to do with the sizes of truck tires, and you want to know what the comparable American reg is, you can actually find that very easily by a sort of ontology-driven system. All of this is years away. I mean, this is not stuff that we're going to be putting out there by the end of December. But a point that we've been able to make, I think, successfully with government, actually more so in Spain than anywhere else, they're sending us a postdoc for 2 years, is that when you do this stuff, you lower trade barriers. And that is something that governments are willing to fund. I hope this is a warm post-lunch glow. Post-lunch pre-caffeine.
I have a technical question about XML. When do you expect to reach your capacity of XML being like a fast, reasonable solution compared to, say, MySQL or something like that. Because I understand that XML has some capacity problems. Or maybe.
No, you're talking about the exist database or the XML is really a concept more than anything else. But, I mean,
I guess the database itself, yeah.
if you mean the specific exist database instance, so that's really back to the things that Dan was talking about.
Yeah,
that we have to deal with the performance issues. It's developing. It's one of everything else.
Yeah, I mean, we really don't know where it's going. If we encounter problems, it's usually at ingestion time, because at instantiation time, we're not really doing it in real time. We're pre-instantiating stuff. So as far as the performance of exist, what we're really worried about is that someday we're gonna push some updates into the XML database to exist, and it's just not going to go, and it's not going to, and it just simply won't work, and that we hit some kind of arbitrary limit that we didn't know existed because it's not terribly well documented. But as of yet, that's our only worry.
No, it is.
It's Dan's only worry. That's mine.
Yeah, it's Dan's only worry. I guess it was your only worry.
Right.
Yeah, now you're about to get some more. Got a notepad? No, I mean, from the point of view of a coder, I mean, we've known since early 2000 when we first started to do the US code stuff this way. We were working with like Zaylan and Xerces style tools and all that stuff that was coming out of Apache for XML processing. You start processing XML, you start having memory problems as the structures get larger and more complex. And so there was a while when we were fighting a running gun battle with Zaylan and Xerces as far as running out of memory limits and so forth on servers in Java. And I find the same thing is true inside Drupal when we start moving big XML structures around inside there and trying to parse something like that. But the best solution to that is like the old joke about the doctor. It hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that. And so to the extent that we can avoid doing it, we do.
The U.S. code is deliberately fragmented in small pieces.
That's right.
Section-sized pieces. For that reason, we control that boundary.
Right. Right.
If we have to, we empty the machine. You can, do one at a time. You have to serialize it, and you can do the same thing with exist. You could have multiple exist instances if you had to. No problem. Dan's good. Or you will be. In the cloud, you can crank us up another dozen machines. Cancel.
Just the budget a little
Our little
Yes, have no fear.
I love working with optimists. It's a treat.
Yeah, smile and nod, boys. Smile and nod.
How does Exist compare to some of the other new NoSQL databases like Cassandra and Mongo?
I think the short answer is we don't know, which is to say that we made an arbitrary decision about a year ago and haven't had a day to revisit it.
Right.
Very little bit of initial study and had to make a decision.
What everybody's nicely not saying is that their kamikaze director kind of did this.
No, but I mean, we have.
I think I folded there too, but I think
But we have some internal protocols for choosing things that are well developed and relatively mature, relatively well maintained. So
We do.
you told me that. That's the paradigm I've been working on.
Right, and that is all
he just described the implementation.
Yeah.
So that's us. Right?
So we should allow you guys to escape. We will have more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, and in a minute they're going to turn the recording off.
We're saving the best questions for them.
That's right. The red light goes off. So do the gloves.
Oh, is that what that was?
Sorry.
That's kind of like the
'Cause they do tell me, exactly, so that's what we did with networking people that. We found it with the UIA thing.
well, you've got these I could go all kinds of private. Exactly. Seriously, I should get mine out and participate. It's exciting. Game of chess. But in order to win your thing, don't you have to be here at the plenary thing? No. You don't have to.
Does that mean?
Thomson Reuters Law School
How many inroads were there?
207 before we ditch and play with the
I'm in the ditch because I want to have any possibility of.
I don't know. She may have displeased the spirit of the mountain.
Okay, and I'm not enchanted by this trending monkey.
So you're going to be at the eating orgy tonight,
Yeah,
right?
this is really about black and white. Unfortunately, you know,